Okay, I guess we'll make a start. First of all, welcome to the LSE. Welcome to 2011, I think it said on the website, so I'm sure Eli will tell us what that's all about. I'm Ellen Helsper, I'm chairing the event for today. I guess I should say welcome to each and every one of you, but especially welcome to Eli Pariser, who's going to be our public speaker for this evening. I have the honor of introducing him and giving a little bit of background information about him, but I'm sure you're all web savvy and he can be found online. I don't think the filter bubble has filtered the information about him out yet. So I guess I'll start with how he describes himself. He describes himself on his website as an online organizer and disorganizer, which seems a quite logical career progression from doing a BA in law, politics, and society. He is co-founder of a website called abaz.org, and I recommend that you go and have a look at it. It's pretty special. A little bit of history is that he used to have his own website, which became kind of a success overnight, I think without him even expecting it, which he merged in November 2001 with a website called moveon.org. Which does basically foreign policy campaigns in the States, if I have understood that correctly. And through the work on that site, he's demonstrated the power of small numbers. For example, how very small donations can be kind of collected and mobilized through online engagement and can actually contribute to something quite big. And a lot of the things that he's done have now become standard practice in online organizing. So it's quite a legacy. Another claim to fame, apparently, is how his website helped the Democrats reclaim the House and Senate in 2006. A little bit of history here. Okay. Right now, he's executive director at MoveOn.com, or he's actually become president in the meanwhile in 2008. And he's appeared as commentators on shows that we all know, at least Start of the Week, which is the UK one, but other ones like Good Morning America, World News Tonight, and the Colbert Report, and you say very explicitly on your website, everywhere except Fox News. So I think I should mention that. Okay. So, but the main reason he's here tonight is that in May 2011, he published this wonderful book called The Filter Bubble, What the Internet is Hiding from You. That's what we would all like to know. I really enjoyed reading the book, I really did. It reminded me of some of the things that I already knew and probably shouldn't have forgotten. But it also gave me some new ideas and got me thinking about some stuff kind of in a new direction. So I guess you kept me up at night a little bit. I'm really looking forward to hearing you tell us in person what your book is all about and what you would like the main message to be. You will speak for about 40 minutes. After that, we'll open the floor to discussion. We'll take questions. Everybody, I'm hoping, who has a question will get the time to ask it, although it tends to be the case that we run out of time in these events. But just to mention this now already, for those of you who are interested, after the questions and after the event, there will be book sales and book signing outside, and you'll be there to hopefully maybe answer some quick questions for those people who are interested in the book and the signing. So, the floor is all yours.
Great. Hi, everybody. I grew up in a small town in a rural part of Maine. There's about 900 people in our town. And growing up, I got my Wired magazines and I read about the internet, and I imagined this sort of global connective medium. I imagined being in conversation with people in different continents, people who had coming into contact with radically different ideas. I imagined it as sort of a way of connecting to the world far beyond my little town. And recently I've been wondering if the internet is actually going to turn out that way. I've been thinking that maybe it's not quite as connective as we thought. So the first inkling that I had that something might be a little amiss happened on my Facebook page. And This was after I'd spent several months actually seeking out people who thought differently from me. I really wanted to hear from people who had different political views, see what they were posting, engage in some conversations, and learn a thing or two. But when I loaded my Facebook page, I noticed something strange. My conservative friends weren't there. And as it turned out, Facebook had been watching what I was doing on the site. It had been tracking every click and every like. And it had noticed that, well, I said I wanted to hear from my conservative friends. Actually, I was clicking more on the links that my more liberal friends were posting. And so without consulting me about it, it edited them out. They disappeared. And this got me thinking, this got me curious. And I started to see this phenomenon pop up all over the web. And I'll get to some of the other places that it's popping up in a second, but it drove me to ask this question, why? Why is this technology spreading so rapidly? So the place to start here, I think, just as a brief background on the sort of rise of the era of personalization, is a problem that Eric Schmidt at Google likes to talk about. And he describes it this way. In all of human history, if you take everything that people said, if you take everything, every conversation, every work of art, and you were to translate it into bits, it'd be about 5 exabytes. That's about 80 million 80 gigabyte iPods, if you want to think about it that way. 5 exabytes. And the problem is that that's the same amount of data that was created in the last 3 days. So there's this torrential surge of data that is pouring online from picture phones, from status updates, from documents and videos, and we're overwhelmed by it. We need some way of sorting through it. And what some clever engineers figured out was that you could actually locate some patterns in the data. You could start to see that certain kinds of data went together. And you could do this thing that we're all now familiar with of, if you like this, you'll like that. You could start to say, this is a person who clicked on this, and we know that other people like that person also clicked on something else. So we can predict that if we show them that, they'll be more interested. And the interesting thing about this process of finding these patterns in the data is that often you discover correlations that are very hard to spot from a human eye. You wouldn't necessarily know that you were revealing what you were revealing about yourself when you reveal a certain piece of data. For example, if you said that you prefer milk to wine, you might not know that that's actually a very likely indicator that you're a political conservative. Or if you mention the Big Lebowski, you might not recognize that that signals you out as a very likely to be a white male. Or if you like The Wizard of Oz on Netflix, you might not recognize that that makes you very likely to like another movie. You can probably guess what it is. Of course, Silence of the Lambs. Or you might not recognize that if your desktop was cluttered, that you're 12% more likely to be politically liberal. So there are all of these connections between these pieces of data that reveal things about us that we may not recognize that we're revealing. And in fact, when I talked to someone at a company called Hunch, he explained to me that with just 5 data points about a person, you can generally predict with about an 80% accuracy almost their answer to any other question of consumer preference. And not only that, but in fact, if you know 2 people, if 2 of my friends have revealed their 5 data points, then even if I haven't revealed anything, if you know that they're my friends, you get that same 80% accuracy on what my preferences would be. So our privacy, this personal information in a way is being crowdsourced, where it's not just about what we reveal, it's also about what our friends reveal. And the company that has actually, in some ways, gone the furthest with this process of statistical correlation and using that to serve people personalized data is Google. So Google actually, starting in December 4th, 2009, has been personalized. We don't all see the same Google results. In fact, there is no standard Google anymore. There's no way to turn it fully off. We see a subjective result, not the quote-unquote authoritative or definitive one. And I decided to try to test this out recently just to see how significant the phenomenon was. So I asked a bunch of people earlier this winter to Google Egypt. So here's my friend Scott's Google search, and here's my friend Daniel's Google search. They're both male, Caucasian men in New York. They're about the same age. And when you put them side by side, you don't actually even have to see the text to see how different these two views are. But what's really dramatic is that Scott got all of this information about the crisis in Egypt, about what was going on there politically in his top 3 results. Daniel got nothing about the Arab Spring, about the protests there in his first page of results. He got literally nothing at all. It was like it had never happened. So the driving force behind this, if you talk to people at these companies, is a race for what they call relevance. Relevance is kind of the watchword. And at Facebook and at Google and at many other companies that are trying to take over the new web, that's sort of the key thing. Can you engineer relevance? Can you find better ways of providing personally relevant information? And to do that, they need this massive amount of data about each of us. So the top 50 websites collect on average about, or deposit about 64 tracking cookies and personally identifying pieces of code on each of our computers a piece, the top 50 websites. And that allows them to follow us around the web wherever we go. And not only that, but to actually sell that data to other companies. So there's this whole behavior market that is starting in which a click on a website over here can, in milliseconds, be raffled off to a website over here, which can use that data to customize what we see. And that's why the people in these companies are very bullish on this technology, because it means that people will click more, it means that people will view more ads, it means people that will stay on these sites longer because they're seeing things that are familiar, they're seeing things that are like them. And so Sheryl Sandberg, the number 2 person or Taban Bhat at Yahoo, says the future of the web is about personalization. And Sheryl Sandberg, the number 2 person at Facebook, says that in a few years it'll be anachronistic to see a website that is not customized or personally tailored in some way. And Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO, says it will be very hard for people to watch or consume something that has not in some way been tailored for them. So this is spreading like wildfire. It started with ads. It started with being able to target ads to each of us based on our interests, but then it moved to products, and now it's moving to information. It's moving to news. Yahoo News, the biggest news website on the internet, is now personalized. Different people see different sets of stories. And in the United States, the New York Times and the Washington Post have both invested heavily in startups that are trying to provide this kind of custom-tailored, personalized version of a newspaper. And I think, really it was Mark Zuckerberg who summed up both the promise and the peril of this best. Zuckerberg was talking to a journalist who asked him about the Facebook newsfeed. What's so special about the Facebook newsfeed? Why be so excited about it? And he said, a squirrel dying in front of your house may be more relevant to your interests right now than people dying in Africa. And I want to talk about what a web based on that idea of relevance is going to look like. So the picture here is that increasingly online, we see the world that we want to see. Not necessarily the world that it is, not necessarily the world that we need to see. It means that increasingly, without knowing it, we're surrounded by this array of personalized filters, almost a membrane that sits between us and the world. And that suggests to me that what we live in increasingly is a filter bubble. It's a unique personal universe of information that's created by all of these filters. And the thing about the filter bubble is that we don't decide what gets edited in, and therefore we really don't know what's being edited out. We don't know what we're not seeing. So what's different about the filter bubble, you might say that, let me get to the right slide here. You might say, well, media has always done this. We've always sought out news sources that confirm our own beliefs. We've always sought out the familiar. What's really different about algorithms doing that work for us? And I think there are three ways in which this is really actually quite different than turning on Fox News or, in the United States, MSNBC. And the first difference is that the filter bubble that you live in is unique. You don't share it necessarily with anyone else. It's not like opening a periodical and knowing that you're reading it along with another audience of readers, that you can get on the phone and discuss it with a friend. It's your own personal set of information. It may be different from your friends or your families or your neighbors. The second is that the filtering that happens is invisible to us. We don't know on what basis Yahoo News or Google or Facebook is deciding which information to show us and which information is not to show us. We don't know what the editorial viewpoint is. And as a result, it's very hard to guess what is being left out. As Donald Rumsfeld says, it's an unknown unknown. And the final thing is that this is a passive experience. We're not sort of choosing to take a lens and view the world through it. Increasingly, the lens sort of follows us around. And it's increasingly hard to escape. In fact, it's almost like you sort of step 2 steps to the side to get a better view on something, to get a different angle, and the world turns to meet your gaze. So I think there are a number of problems with the filter bubble for both people and societies, but the ones I want to focus tonight on 3. So the first is this problem of distortion. It's the problem that essentially what you're getting here is a distorted, filtered view of the world that you don't actually know is distorted. You don't know in what way it's angled. And one of the reasons that you get this kind of distortion is that the psychology behind this, the same psychology that makes it very lucrative for companies to build into their software, is going to mean that we're likely to see more things that are familiar and that we agree with. The neuroscience is now good enough that we can almost pinpoint these little bursts of pleasure that we all get in our brains when we're presented with information that confirms what we already thought was true. And conversely, it's nearly universal that when we're presented with information that challenges what we believed, that makes us question whether we were right, we all get cranky. That's just sort of the way it goes. And the question is, if you could build a program that was able to give people more of those dopamine bursts per minute, more little bursts of pleasure per minute, why would you ever show them the stuff that makes them cranky? Why would you ever show them the stuff that challenges what they think, that suggests that maybe we don't all have the answers? So that's the distortion problem. And what it also means is that we're less likely to see things that are important but not immediately clickable or compulsively sort of attention seeking, attention gathering. The way that I think about this is with the Facebook like button. So the like button is the primary way that information gets propagated about Facebook. Unless anyone is thinking, it's just Facebook, it's for kids, whatever. At this point, I think we really need to take Facebook seriously. Facebook is a medium used by 1 in 11 people on Earth. People are spending on average about 7 hours a month on this one website. That's far more than any other website. And so when that medium has sort of a filtering process in it that shapes what people see and what people don't see, I think we would do well to attend to what it is. And in Facebook's case, the word like has a very particular valence. Like is a positive word. It's very easy to click like on I ran a marathon today, or I baked a really delicious cake. And it's very hard to click like on a civil war breaks out in the Congo, right? Or Iranian woman is about to be stoned to death. So one category of things moves very quickly, and another category of information may not move at all. It may not make it through the filter bubble on Facebook. I think that's a problem. The second category of problem, I think, is a problem that the anthropologist Dana Boyd called the psychological equivalent of obesity. And the place that I think this is best illustrated is with some research that was recently done about the Netflix queue. Researchers were looking at movies moving through the Netflix queue, and they noticed that some just kind of zipped to the top of the queue. People decided to rent it. It moved very quickly up and out to people's mailboxes, and and they watched it very quickly. And there were other movies that would just kind of linger just on the threshold just before being sent out for days or months or sometimes years. And they decided to graph these movies and see what they saw. So they put it on a graph with the movies that moved most quickly over here and the movies that moved least quickly over here. And they saw two very distinct clusters, right? Over here, the movies that are moving quickly, these are the want movies. These are, Iron Man and romantic comedies. These are movies that on a long day you come home and you go, I just want to watch that. And over here, the movies that took a while, you can all guess probably what these movies were, right? This was documentaries, French cinema, and Holocaust movies. That was sort of those three. So Iron Man moves very quickly through the queue. Waiting for Superman takes its sweet time. And what they realized was that there was actually something kind of profound going on here. That, in fact, this was a sort of tug of war between two inner selves. Because we all want to be someone who has watched the great hits of French cinema. But right now, we all want to watch Ace Ventura for the 5th time. And so, there's this tug of war between this sort of short-term compulsive self and the longer-term aspirational self. And I think the thing to remember here is that the great media actually plays an important role in mediating those two selves and helping us balance those two things. It gives us some information, vegetables, and some information, dessert, and we get a balanced information diet. But because of the focus just on what we click first, on what we're most compulsively attracted to and attend to first, the filter bubble can have a very different effect. It can leave us in a world full of, instead of, you get some balance here. You get Justin Bieber in Afghanistan and in the old media. But the filter bubble can leave us in this world just full of information junk food, where that's all we see. And that's why Dana Boyd talks about the psychological equivalent of obesity. So the final problem that I want to talk about right now is a problem that's more basic in some ways. It's a problem about control. And this is illustrated beautifully in an essay called Of Sirens and Amish Children by a legal theorist named Yochai Benkler. And the title is the lyrical part. It's actually about 90 pages of dense legal theory. But I'll sort of sum it up here. He was investigating a case involving whether Amish parents in America could keep their kids out of public schools. And what the courts started talking about in this case, it reached the Supreme Court, was the nature of agency, the nature of choice. The question they were asking was, if you were shielded from knowing about the modern world, could you be said to make a choice to live that lifestyle? Could you be said to actually be choosing? And what he concludes is that really you couldn't, that choice is a function of understanding what our options are, even options that we don't expect to take, or options that we don't think that we'll ever take, that's part of what it means to be an agent, is to be able to see as many choices as possible and to choose between them. And so when we're using these kind of passive personalized feeds, I think we cede some control in a way that can be really important. We cede the ability to know what our choices are. And so it concerns me when Eric Schmidt says, as he did recently, that people want Google to tell them what to do next. Or when Larry Page says that the goal of a search engine like Google is to show people one result, the right one. Because that makes sense when I'm Googling for my dentist's phone number. But it doesn't make sense when I'm Googling climate change or I'm Googling Barack Obama. So what this all suggested to me is that the sort of topology of the internet that I had in my head was kind of wrong. You know, I had sort of bought the mythology about the internet that in the old bad days, there was this broadcast society where a few white-haired editors and producers sat in rooms and decided what people got to know. And they were the gatekeepers. And the internet came along and it swept them away. All of a sudden, we could all connect to each other. And power was decentralized. So here's the gatekeepers. The internet comes along. And all of a sudden, we can talk to each other. We can connect. And that's not really what's happening. There are a new set of gatekeepers in town. And this time, they're not people. They're code. And so I think the problem is that the code doesn't have embedded in it the set of ethics about what serves citizens well that the 20th century paradigm, for all of its faults, had. It doesn't have those same kind of editorial values. And I think if we're going to rely on these systems to show us the world, to decide what we see and what we don't see, to make many of the same calls that the editors of the 20th century did, then we need to make sure that they don't just focus on this very narrow idea of relevance. We need to make sure that they also show us things that are important or uncomfortable or challenging. We need to make sure that even if it makes us cranky, it shows us other points of view. There's a conversation that the book has started about algorithmic paternalism. That's sort of a new catchphrase. And some people use that phrase to describe what I'm suggesting here, to describe the idea that you could embed, it would be bad to embed values in algorithms. Why not just let the code be pure and neutral? And the thing is that actually there's no such thing as pure and neutral code. The thing is that by their nature, when you're making a ranked list, when you're deciding what people see and don't see, you're making value decisions. You're making decisions about what's true, about what's important. That's what Google is in the business of doing. That's why we all trust it in the first place. And so I think the actual kind of paternalism that's happening here is a different kind of paternalism. It's when these sites say, we're going to take what you actually, what your behavior suggests that you'll do over what you explicitly say. Think about my experience on Facebook, right? I had gone out of my way to add these people. But instead of trusting that signal from me, it was looking at my behavior and saying, it's going to overrule me. It's going to decide what I see, because that keeps me on Facebook for more minutes a day. Another example is Netflix. Netflix is rapidly making a transition away from the star system because they're realizing that the streaming data is much more accurate in terms of predicting behavior. They're realizing that people actually make some of the same psychological leaps in the star system that they did, that they do in the queue, which is they rate Citizen Kane with 5 stars even if they didn't actually enjoy it that much because they feel like they're obligated to. And so what they can do now, because they actually know what people are watching, is that they say, well, you started Citizen Kane and you watched about 5 minutes of it and then you flicked over to Fast and Furious 5, and so that's what you're actually interested in. That's paternalism, in my view. That's them deciding they know better than we do. And I think if we're going to live with these systems, then we need to make sure, we need to demand some control. We need to demand some transparency so that we actually see when this is at work and on what basis these companies are editing our information. And we need to make sure that they have these kinds of values built in. Code is not neutral. In fact, back in 1980, a computer scientist named Kranzberg came up with what is now known as Kranzberg's first law. I don't know what his other laws were, but his first law is that technology is neither good nor evil, nor is it neutral. And I think that's really important to remember as it increasingly mediates what we know of the world. So Tim Berners-Lee, the guy who actually created the web in the first place, wrote a very powerful Scientific American article recently in which he said, the web as we know it is being threatened. Some of its most successful inhabitants have begun to chip away at its basic principles. And I think that's part of what we're seeing here. We're seeing the web kind of close in on itself under the pressure of commercialism. And I think that's a problem because we actually need the web to be as good as we all hoped it would be. We need that not just because it'll make browsing more fun, but because actually we can't solve the big problems that are in front of us without a medium that accomplishes that end. If you think about climate change, if you think about terrorism or poverty, these are not problems that any one person can sit in a room and solve. They're going to require massive coordination between people from different disciplines and different continents, different ways of thinking, coming together to actually create a solution that works for all of us. We need the internet to be able to do that, to introduce us to new ideas and new people, to introduce us to different ways of thinking. And it's not going to do that if it leaves us all stuck in a web of one. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That was great. I love those graphics as well. We all want to steal those. I think there's a room. Yeah, there's two or one roaming mic. Oh yeah, sorry, I can't see you. Okay. Probably what I'll do is I'll take 3 questions at a time. So if you can keep them short and concise, and a question and not a statement, that would be great. And then Eli will get a chance to kind of integrate them and to hopefully answer all 3 of them. I am going to start at the back. Sorry, guys. Let me have there in the middle. Yeah. And then that question as well. And then if I can have another hand up. Okay, there in the middle.
First of all, thank you for a very interesting and quite scary talk. I've got a couple of questions, actually. One is, you mentioned that sort of the positive information feedback makes it easier to target information. And would that apply as well to the information that we're not giving back about the things that we don't like? So how easy would it be really technically to actually feed back that information? And my second question is, if it makes people uncomfortable to actually see that, what makes you think that it would actually work, given that most people don't actively try and pursue it? Thank you.
Okay.
Given the fact that all of these systems, the Facebook and the Googles and everything else, derive their revenue from commercial elements of what you're doing on the internet and what you're actually being exposed to, and are filtering those in exactly the same ways you've described, and I think what you've done is a fascinating social study here. Given those are commercial, what should we be looking at? What should we be doing with advertising messages? Should it be left for consumers to be able to filter those themselves and to set up their own set of filters instead of their own online behavior setting the filter? Or do we want to liberate that completely such that there is no filtering going on? Because consumers tend to find those filters quite useful, but they're threatening in the same way as you've described. So I'm just interested to see what you think from a commercial perspective.
Okay. One more question there. Yeah.
Yes, I just wondered if you could come up with 5 points or 5 suggestions of how we could escape the bubble.
Right.
All right. With the last question first, on my website I have 10, so you can choose any 5. And it's just thefilterbubble.com. I won't bore people with the technical details, but there are some modest ways that it is possible to dial this down. It's not really possible to turn it off completely, but you can make a good effort. In terms of the question of why we should expect commercial entities to behave differently, or what the sort of solution is in terms of either turning off this filtration or putting consumers in control, I tend to be of the sort of give people control over this and make it transparent to them school. I don't think, I'm not actually against personalization, in part because of the problem that, of that information explosion. I think we will need help from algorithms. In a way, the question is, who do they work for? Do they work for us, or do they work for these companies, and how transparent are they being about that question? And I think if we're going to cede this control, then we need to make sure that they work for us more. To the question of positive versus negative information feedback, it's a great question, and in fact, I learned something interesting on this point recently, which is I didn't know that the Facebook like button adds the fact that you viewed a page that it is on to your Facebook profile, or can transmit that information to Facebook, whether you click it or not. In other words, Facebook is actually gathering any page that you visit with a like button and adding it to your account. And what that in theory should be able to do is precisely the thing of not only track where you do click like, but where you don't click like, that it would have guessed that you would have, in order to make better predictions. Again, I think that's sort of far beyond the expected behavior for what a company like Facebook would be gathering, and I think we've seen that they do that again and again and again. And finally, the question about if people don't like it, if people feel uncomfortable or being challenged by alternative views, why would that work in a commercial service? And I think there's a couple answers to that. The first is that a lot of the best experiences actually start with that sense of discomfort, but those are the experiences that you remember 5 or 10 years later. And so I sort of half joke that we need like it was a hard slog at first and then it changed my life button to go alongside the like button, because actually when you think sort of, well, even at the end of a week, what did I read that really stood with me? It's often actually a different set of things from the set of things that you'll click first or that you'll even click like on necessarily. So, that's sort of one piece of that. And then I think the other piece is, we do have, it's not like the media that we have, as sort of corporate as they sometimes can be, just puts the most, the things that sell the most papers or sell the most news, or get the most viewers, on the front page. Actually, the media that we have is less sort of optimized in this way than this is, and I think that's because people actually appreciate the sense of, I'm getting the whole picture here, even if I'm not really going to love some pieces of it. I think that's sort of an incentive in the long run for people to develop ways to challenge this.
Okay, more questions? Okay, can I have here this person, let me see, your question, and you.
Oh, hello. Just wondering what your opinion on Wikipedia is as a a source that most people get their facts from.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Hi. My main question is about internet anonymity. Sorry, I messed that up. But I'm sure you've heard of the Tor project and the main, disguising yourself online. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that, because you talk about the bubble, but there are ways to get around it. I mean, I use proxies quite a lot, but just for feeling safer is all. Hiding myself from people trying to get my information.
Okay, and then here. Can you come here to front? These were all quite short questions, I think, so we can do two.
I'll keep it as short as I can. It's a gender question. I just loved what you had to say, and you've really opened my eyes. So I use this as an example. I clicked on Christine Lagarde the other day, which I'm sure most people in this room know is standing for the IMF. And the suggestions that came up, mostly I use Alta Vista rather than Google, and if I can't find it, because I know what Google's doing. I thought I knew. And what came up was hair, husband, something or other, and children. And listening to you, I've realised why, because I'm impressed by her as a politician, as a speaker, but I also thought, as a woman of a certain age, she had a fabulous hairstyle, and I wanted to take it to my hairdresser. And therefore, being a woman, they assumed that I wanted to know if she had a husband, was she married, she had kids. IMF was not mentioned, and that actually I find it's a good example because it's really scary. So what I want to know is, the people who watch the internet most, who use it most, are men and women. The people who write the software are men or women, and the people who do the data collecting. Now, you use the word paternalism. I'm so pleased you did.
All right.
Can we have one more? Then we'll do four of us.
Hi, I wonder, because when you access Facebook from your normal computer, it shows me mainly news feed from my friends, like which animal has died or something. But if I access it via my BlackBerry, for example, it shows me most of the sites, for example, of The Economist, more academic websites. So the newsfeed is completely different, actually. And why is that the case? And how can you change it that I have the same, actually more academic access on the computer, not only from my BlackBerry?
All right. Well, starting with Wikipedia, I'm actually quite a fan of Wikipedia. I think it does one of the best jobs of doing this kind of neutral synthesis of anywhere online. It's sort of the opposite, in a way, of a lot of these dynamics. And it's the page on Barack Obama, a hotly politically contested topic, really does a quite elegant job of sort of explaining the kind of key points without getting too distracted into he said, she said. So I think as a model, it's very good. And it's notable that it's the one website, probably in the top 50, definitely in the top 10, that's not commercial. It's not driven by these same kinds of forces as as Google or Facebook are. In terms of the Tor project and ways of anonymizing yourself online, I guess I think that ultimately is a cat and mouse game in which the mouse is likely to lose for a series of reasons. Partly, I mean, there's so much money in getting these signals and getting these sort of little bits of information that reveal stuff about you. And so, for example, there's a great website called Panopticlick, put on by the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And what that does is it looks simply at the unique set, at the set of software, hardware, and settings that are transmitted to any web surfer that any web site that you browse. As it turns out, in almost all cases, that's unique. It's basically a fingerprint that you could use because you say, you're the only person who has exactly this version of your computer and exactly this version of this piece of software and that piece of software and so on. So there are lots of ways that this sort of fingerprinting is well ahead of the attempts to sort of block it. And if I understand Tor right, I'm not sure that Tor would foil that. So I think the point of all that is that I think there are ways of addressing this, but I think that the central way to address it is with the big companies that are doing it, not sort of through workarounds that both are complicated, unlikely to work for a long time, and most people are not going to be able to figure out or use. To the question about Christine Lagarde, it illustrates something that it sort of goes to that Kranzberg's first law point, I think, which is that people sort of imagine that because it's code and because it's math, it doesn't have any kind of normative or social values built into it. And this is sort of the most frustrating thing for me in arguments with, I had this argument with Google where they said, look, man, we're not trying to, do anything malicious here. We're just trying to give people what's relevant for them. And I said, okay, but if I'm a 9/11 conspiracy theorist and I Google 9/11, is it your job to give me the link that I'm most likely to click, which is another conspiracy website, or is it to give me, the Popular Mechanics article that debunks that stuff? And being a PR guy that I was talking to, he said, we'll have to get back to you on that. So, the point is these things are normative, and in fact, often what ends up happening is that you're pushed toward the sort of societal. It says, oh, this is a woman surfing. We're going to show her the stuff about hair because women statistically, are more. It's entrenching that norm, not exploding it in a personalized way. Finally, to the question about Facebook news feeds and the difference between mobile and the web experience, it has been something that has been peculiar. It is a very recognizable phenomenon, and I have no idea really why it's happening. Sometimes I actually wonder if it's a way for Facebook to play with several different modalities of the news feed with the same users at a massive scale, but that may be. It may just also be that the version that the website is running is much more up to date than the version that's in the software that's on your phone. In any case, the challenge is that even when you're sort of, a lot of people say, well, Facebook has this option where I can see all of the results. Doesn't that pop the bubble? And in fact, as it turns out, even that is heavily filtered. So you don't actually see everything. When you click over to that tab, you're seeing a somewhat less, somewhat dialed down amount of personalization, but not at all the whole picture.
Okay. Questions? Okay, we'll have you, and over there, down back. If you can give the mic to this person.
Hi there. Very interesting what you said, but now let me play a bit of the devil's advocate. Google at the end is not, searching is not a human right, at least now, and also it's not funded by the government. At the end, it's just a private company, right? These two guys created it, but now it's like a money-making beast. So if now it starts to become apparent that they use all the searching methodologies to make it to make more money, what prevents us from moving on and either create a new search engine, or I'm sure there are existing search engines that are not commercially driven. Is that what you would suggest, or getting the governments to put laws to prohibit those commercial driven search? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to come back on one point that you had earlier, that the top 50 websites are pulling 64 pieces of personally identifiable information. I think you misused personally identifiable information because that's against the law. So none of those websites would be doing that. You could say that they could identify you and come back to you, but it's not exactly accurate with the definition of personally identifiable information. Coming back on that, I really liked everything you were talking about in terms of there is more to the internet out there than you see, but there's more than you can filter through. So you said things like, it should be giving you everything that there is out there and giving you a fair and balanced viewpoint, but you haven't been featured on Fox News. People go to Fox News and expect that they're getting a fair and balanced, this is the news of the world, in the same way that they think they're going to Google and getting fair and balanced news of the world. I could tell you that they don't think that they're missing out on the liberalist viewpoint and things like that. I also felt like you kind of conflated the purpose of Facebook and Google in that Facebook is making money off of filtering and keeping you on the site longer, but Google, in terms of the organic search results, isn't making money off that. They're making money off of the paid search links on the side, but if somebody's searching for 9/11, the conspiracy theory, and they're given 5 results that are not accurate to what they think is happening or what they're looking for, they're not going to spend any more time looking on the web and learning about how popular science says they're wrong. They're just going to abandon the internet and go to the library and find other things on the conspiracy theory. So I feel like you're asking the internet to play parent to people in the same way parents ask the government to play parent to their children and disallow everything. And I feel like it's taking a lot of the responsibility off of people who should learn how to search. Barack Obama is not a search in terms of give me everything about this, that, or the other. You have to learn how to use these tools.
You were talking very much about the receiving end. I'm at the sending end. You talked in the balance about homelessness. I run a magazine for homeless people. I wonder if you'd like to address the difficulty of getting unacceptable information out about, sort of, say, fairly unpleasant abuses of human rights. Thank you.
All right. So to the question about sort of search isn't a human right, so what should be done about this? I mean, you asked if maybe we should use search engines that are not commercially driven. A funny sort of footnote that I discovered when I was doing the research for the book is that actually in the original paper about Google by Larry Page and Sergey Brin, they say, and I'm going to have to paraphrase, but a search engine that is driven by advertising will necessarily be corrupted by that profit motive and will not give the best results. That's why we believe that Google should remain a nonprofit academic effort. And that was about like 3 months before they started the company. So take from that what you will. I think we have always viewed the sort of central organs that provide citizens with information as having some additional responsibility in our society. We see news agencies and newspapers as playing kind of a bigger role than just as commercial entities. And I think that's a good thing. I think it is a critical role. And in fact, it wasn't like newspapers were always that way either in most of the 1800s. They really were kind of pretty much putting on the front page whatever sold the most copies. And after World War I, there was this real kind of recognition that in a way that the propaganda effort had been too successful and that basically all of the newspapers had been conscripted very easily in manipulating public opinion, and it had worked, and people realized that, oh, you can actually use these institutions to manipulate public opinion. Therefore, it's extra important that they be independent, that they have this focus on kind of feeding the citizens and people. And that's sort of where the discourse about journalistic ethics, the modern discourse about journalistic ethics comes from. I think in a way, we're sort of back at that moment, on the web, and the new sort of institutions that are playing that role haven't had that moment where they've really come to reckon with this incredibly crucial central role that they're playing. To your points, the point about personally identifiable information, you're right. That was a misphrase. Although it's worth noting that what that information, what those cookies do. I mean, I find the distinction around personally identifiable information to be a little bit misleading from a consumer standpoint. What these companies use it to mean is something like your name or your birth date. But it does in fact mean that if you put a cookie on someone's computer, which is technically not personally identifiable information, that websites can identify you personally and serve you content, for you. It's just that they don't know your name. So it's sort of in the context of personalization, I think it's a little bit of a distinction without a difference. I think in terms of the Fox News analogy, I really think that people view these tools differently. I mean, I think what this comes down to is, are people given the transparency so that they can understand how to use the tools rather than having the tools use them? And I think the challenge here is that the workings of this are hidden. Most people don't even know that this kind of phenomenon is at work in their Google search results, and so it's hard to make any informed choices about what kind of search engine to use, or when to use Google and when to use something else. You don't even know that that part of it exists. Finally, to the point about homelessness, I do think that is one of the exactly sort of in the area of issues of public import that are, to some degree promoted by media because they actually matter, but will quickly fall away in a sort of traffic-driven, optimized, personalized world. The example that I use in the book is the war in Afghanistan. And when you talk to people who are at news agencies and run stories about Afghanistan, they routinely do very poorly because they get very few clicks because it's depressing and complicated, and there are no easy villains or heroes, or but the story is complicated, and yet they persist in putting it on the front page because actually there's a war going on that we're all making decisions about, and we need to know about it. That's what I worry about, sort of disappearing if we're not careful.
Okay, I'm going to abuse my position as chair to ask you a question, actually. It's nice to have power and control. So my question is really about if you envision a future without the real world. Because without any of the media that we now have still existing, without any of our friends ever telling us what they saw online, without having any discussion. This is the way in which the media have traditionally been used. There's a social glue. We see something, maybe not together, but we come and we talk about it. So maybe one of the ways to circumvent the bubble is to actually have friends and a social life and relationships. I'm just wondering, where is the offline? Where is the real world in this book, in your talk?
Well, the challenge is that people's friends don't necessarily play this role at all. In fact, statistically speaking, they're more likely to be more similar than the average bear. There's a great book called The Big Sort, and The Big Sort looks at the way that communities have kind of self-segregated geographically in the United States. And it's been this incredibly intense phenomenon where over the last 30 years, the number of communities that have kind of a diversity of different political viewpoints has dropped precipitously. It's very unlikely, for example, in the United States, for people to know someone from a different social class than they were. And that just wasn't true 30 years ago. And it's basically because people are sort of self-sorting, or rather some people are self-sorting to be with people like them, and then some people are left behind and by definition have that in common with each other. So you'd sort of hope that the internet would be a way actually to broaden your view outside of that little sort of local framework. And in fact, I think what's happening is that sort of we're taking it around with us online. It's hard to escape. I do think that part of what this suggests is that the role of human curators and editors is more important than it's ever been, in a way. And I think if that's done deliberately, and if you're sort of calling out the curator and people, I think there's a difference between relying on your friends to post what's important on Facebook and saying, hey, do you mind curating a set of information for me so that I know what's going on? And I think when you do the latter, you actually, you don't need the sort of editors on high to get a quite good set of information. I think that's sort of one of the hopes here, is that people could rely on people with that sensibility to fill in some of the gaps. If folks are interested, I wrote a little blog post on this called 7 Things That Human Editors Do That Algorithms Don't Yet. And there are a whole bunch of things that these algorithms are actually just terrible at. They're terrible at predicting what is going to be news in 2 days. Some basic things like there's a speech coming up or there's a meeting of 2 world leaders. You could predict that people will want to know about that, but the algorithms are bad at it. And so, at least for the near term, I do think if you want to get good information, it's going to be some mix of human and algorithms, not just the algorithms.
Okay, great. Okay, back to the floor. Okay, I'm going to go in the back again. Why don't I take both the gray and the white shirt, and then let me see. And here, the lady here has her hand up. Yeah.
Hi, I thought it was a really interesting talk. I just wanted to get your thoughts on whether the bubble is a sort of a consequence of us having access to free websites effectively, that there isn't a subscription fee to Facebook or Google, for example, and whether this is just the companies trying to find a return on their investment. Do we have to get more used to paying for things on the internet to have the kind of quality information that we might like, or do you think this would make no difference at all?
Okay, my question is, if we are all creatures of habit, and those who choose to research and are interested in an alternative way of thinking, or looking to be made, have something discomforting, I suppose, presented to them on the internet, surely the vast majority of people will be happy to be assisted, given the plethora of information that's out there. On the flip side of that, if I'm interested to learn about a different perspective, there are any number of different websites I can go to where I know where the alternative perspective will be presented to me. I don't buy one newspaper, for example. I don't look at one news website. I'll look at Al Jazeera, I'll look at BBC, I'll look at CNN, etc., Huffington Post, and so on. I know that they're out there. I can choose, and surely, in my own mind, why wouldn't I? If I wanted a broad-based view, every opinion is out there.
Your points about that it's not about eliminating filters, it's about giving transparency and giving people the choices and control about the filter. Totally agree with that, but also behavioral economics has shown that human beings were pretty rubbish at making choices when it's overwhelming and it's not architected in a way that is good for us, and it's a way of making sense of these choices. So I'm wondering if you want to give people that control and those choices, how do you actually go about architecting those choices that is a way that's not overwhelming, that is going to enable them to make the right decisions?
So let me take that question first. I think, again, the question is on whose basis are you, what are you optimizing for, right? Because news agencies have, or a lot of these websites have something very simple to optimize for, which is the more ad clicks and the more ad views. I think if you really actually wanted to provide people with information that was useful, you could actually use, you could reveal some of this to people so that their choices would be more informed. So, for example, so one example is, you could, on the New York Times, if you sort of dig in under their new personalized recommendation tool, it will actually show you a little graph of here's what you visited, how much, and that's what we're using. And when I visited that, it's actually revealing in a way that changes your behavior, because you go, oh, I had no idea that I wasn't reading any of those articles, and I was reading every single one of, in this case, the technology articles. And it did make me actually change my habits. So there's a thing about sort of, if you're willing to reveal this to people, then actually they can make better decisions. I think the other piece is, a little thought experiment that I like is, on the one hand, you have sort of the clicking self that is surfing one of these websites. Imagine that you tally, all of those different pages that I visit, and then at the end of the week, you send me, here's a list of pages. Why don't you just star the 3 that you thought were actually the best? Again, I think you'll actually find a useful discrepancy there that you could then use to inform how things were recommended to people better, because you'd be actually giving them the stuff that stuck with them, not just the things that, the things I click first, at least, are not often the things that stick with me. And that's sort of actually part of just learning. That's sort of, by definition, we like the familiar, but then learning is about getting out of the familiar, and so that's a challenge. And you want to build these things to promote that. To the question about sort of being creatures of habit, I think those things go together in a way. I think in a way it's sort of my problem with this is that it's an insufficient interrogation of the idea of what people want, because sort of as in the Netflix example, we all want a lot of mutually contradictory things. We want to eat cake and be thin, and the question is, how do you mediate those things, and which do you take as the signal that this is really what you want? I think if you ask people to choose, do you want just the stuff that you click on most, or do you want the stuff that will make you feel like a better citizen in the long run, but you'll be annoyed by it sometimes? I think a lot of people would actually, sort of make that, would not just choose, show me just the stuff that I like. Finally, the question about the bubble as a consequence of free websites. I mean, I think this in a way is sort of one of the hearts of the problem, which is it's not free at all. For these companies, the data that we're giving them translates directly into money. I mean, almost to the point where you could put a dollar figure on some of the pieces of data. So to the companies, they know very well how much value is being sucked in. It's just their job is to make it sort of opaque to us and make it seem like there's no transaction going on there at all. They're doing us a favor. And I think Google would feel very different if we perceived it as a $100 a year service that we're paying for in data rather than a free service and they do some stuff that who knows what they do.
Okay. We'll take 2 more rounds of questions just so that you know what the timing on this is. I think you've had your, sorry, yes, she's had her hand up for a while. Can I also have here this gentleman in the front? Yeah, okay.
How can we regulate if governments want us to regulate? If governments should be the ones regulating, should the industry, the internet bubble try to pierce the bubble itself and sort of industry code?
Okay.
My question is, I mean, you've been political, if you like, with a small p throughout this evening. If I can introduce the political with the big P, campaigning, anxieties about voting patterns and so on. I've got a long-term interest in personalization and predictive modeling and data mashing. We know, going back to 1997 in this country, that election was determined by less than 250,000 people. Similar activity has gone on in the States for far longer than political activists in the States have been campaigning about. The issue about personalization is not quite as either the person who challenged you said, nor as you replied, in that quite a lot of your searches will probably contain your postcode, your zip code, your name, name of your friends and family, and so on. It's surprising how personal your ISP number can be.
Yeah.
What are you conscious of that the people who are in this space, by which I mean the pollsters who are working with the predictive modelers, are, and they buy all the data sets and so on, what are they doing to rig our electoral process?
Hi, great talk. I actually do research into recommender systems, so that's why I wanted to come here today. I was just a little bit disappointed because you're not being very fair to some of the ways that people use these tools for discovery, particularly with music and stuff like that. But that aside, my question is more about the examples that you were choosing. So, of course, I think everyone in the room would agree that a squirrel really isn't as important as a person dying, but you're sort of saying that there's an objective truth behind news stories. And so, do you think that's the case? And if you do think that there is an objective truth that one story does particularly trump another, say when two people are dying, right? Which one would you choose, right? So, of course, these kind of things can't really be captured by the way people's clicks, but I'd like you to maybe pick a bigger example. Thanks.
So to the question about regulation, somewhere here. I think that the locus, I think there probably is a need for regulation, and I think the locus of that is giving people control over their personal information in the first place. At least in the United States, the privacy laws are 40 years old, and they just don't contemplate a world in which a click over here can reveal something fairly personal to you to a website over here and be sold for money without you ever knowing about it, and then this website can show you something different on that basis. That seems to me like something that we ought to have some knowledge of and some control over. And as with many sort of legal and technical issues, it's just a problem of the technology being far ahead of sort of the law's ability to catch up with it. But I think that's sort of the regulatory reset that needs to happen. On the question about sort of politics and political campaigning, and there is a chapter about that in the book, it does concern me. Less in practice and more in theory, because at least in the American political culture, while there's some of this that goes on, it's really not as sophisticated. It's certainly nowhere near what Google is doing. I mean, there's some targeting that happens, but the ability to shape what people see and they don't see online, especially in content, we're just beginning to enter that world. I do worry about it, though, because I think in campaigning, the dynamics of campaigning will mean that increasingly sort of it looks less like a conversation and more like a set of unlinked accusations. So, for all of the faults of the sort of campaign ad and the broadcast media, at least it means that there's one venue in which the candidates are making their arguments to each other, as opposed to this sort of fragmented thing where you may not even know what arguments are being made against you. They never link up. They're ships passing in the night. That's my worry about this. Finally, the question about sort of, do I have a sense of objective truth behind the news stories or what have you? No, I mean, I think it is always subjective, as is everything, but I think there are ways that you could draw out that signal. If you had a Facebook important button that had the function of signaling this is socially important, I actually, think you would actually get some good data out of that you could mix into the Facebook newsfeed. I don't think that I'm not suggesting that we need to sort of institutionalize search for Afghanistan, and if that story comes up, then bump it up in the ranking. I think there are ways that you could actually draw that information out if it was of concern to do that. And I think that's sort of the question is, is there an interest in doing that? When I talk to folks at these companies, and I'm talking again mostly about Facebook and Google and to some degree Yahoo and Amazon, engineers are sometimes very excited about that, but at the top level, it's not a programming priority to figure out how do we boost that up. It's not going to be making nearly as much money as doing that kind of prediction. So that's my concern, is essentially, I think you could draw that out from people as a whole, not from some authority on high, but you would need to actually be asking the right questions.
Right, the last three questions. Let's make it good. Okay, let's go here in the front. And, okay, can I ask the gentleman there with a hat? And then, I think you've had your hand up for a while, so I'll give it to you. Yeah.
Thank you. It was a great talk. I'm just thinking about the role of public broadcasters. So in the Western democracies, obviously, it's very different in the States, but in the Western democracies, we've got great public broadcasters with a significant online presence, and I'm just wondering what you think the role they play.
Hello. Oh, yeah. Thank you for what has been an interesting discussion. I'm an artist, and I done some research when I was at art school about the internet. And at that time, there was a lot of talk about elites, like hackers on one side and large institutions on the other. Much of tonight's talk has revolved around Google and Facebook, which seem to be large institutions controlling things on the internet at the moment. Now, these elites, they're people who have a good grasp of the technology. And as the technology moves forward, where do you think it's going?
Hi, great talk. I just have two questions, basically. The first one is, I think we all know that if you're into a subject online, if you're very interested and you go digging, you can find amazing information. You can find stuff which is not normally in the press or on TV and so forth. And Google's PageRank traditionally has been seen by lots of people as a meritocracy. Right. And if you start a new business, and if you've got a great idea, if you write an amazing blog post, it kind of will be found. So I was wondering about the balance of your talk, because it sounds quite alarmist, and I still think that it's a great opportunity for young people or people that don't have a lot of capital to invest in a business to get ahead compared to the previous media dispensation we were in. That's the one thing. The other thing I was just wondering is I agree with you that you have to curate your curators, and that's becoming more important. And I was wondering, is that why Twitter is so amazing if you use it correctly?
Yes. And perfectly said, because it really is a question of if you use it correctly. But, the Facebook example that I gave, those same people who I followed on Twitter, I see regularly. Karl Rove comes up all the time in my Twitter feed, and so I think Twitter at least makes it transparent on what basis you're going to see pieces of information, and gives people a very clear sense of control. That said, they just announced a couple weeks ago that they're starting to do personalized recommendations for Twitter search. So when you search for something on Twitter, it's not sort of the top result overall, it's the result that's best for you. And that explains why when I was talking to someone at Twitter and I was saying, you guys really get this, they were going, well, it's a hard question. To the question about meritocracy and PageRank, I think PageRank was that way. PageRank, was this thing where sort of the web was voting in aggregate about what the right answer was. I think, part of my problem is that, we're sort of veering away from that and toward a more subjective behavior-based sort of way of working. And the challenge is, yes, you can go digging and find things, but it actually may be hard to kind of get out of that hole in a way. You'll have that acute interest following you around and influencing what else you see for a long time to come. So the question is, how do you get it right? How do you balance those things well? And one of the challenges is we have no idea, because it's all so opaque that it's hard to say whether Google is doing a good balancing job or not on that score, because they won't tell us anything about really how it, about how the code looks. To the question about elites and their grasp on this technology, one of my favorite interviews that I did for the book was with a guy who is one of the top information warfare specialists, and he got very fascinated by what this kind of system would mean for changing public opinion, because you wouldn't actually even have to censor things out. You could just sort of adjust the informational friction around certain pieces of information, and most people would never come across it. And in a way, actually, that's sort of what China does with a firewall more than, certainly there's censorship there, but a lot of it is actually accomplished with that sort of, it's less about not being possible to find that information and more making it, adding some friction so that most people don't go out of their way. Anyway, I find it sort of one of the more concerning sort of potentials here, and that's basically just a function of a huge amount of internet traffic running through a few institutions that have good reason to want to keep governments happy with them. There's nothing sort of nefarious per se about that, but it can lead bad places, as we know. Finally, the question about public broadcasters, and I do think it's a great case for public information utilities that don't require these sort of commercial motives. I think probably we need to rethink what that looks like in this sort of new landscape. But I think the BBC website or even the NPR website in the United States have become sort of newly powerful and relevant because they do actually sort of provide this very this broad view. That said, if you have them sort of to the point on homelessness, if you have them churning out all of these great stories about problems in far-flung countries, and it's all getting intercepted by algorithms that filter it out, then obviously you haven't actually gotten that far. And so I think in some way we still need to grapple with what are the values of the things that are doing the filtering, regardless of who's actually producing information that's valuable. I really appreciate everyone's questions and thoughtful commentary, and I'd be happy to personalize your book if you want.
Okay, going to use thank you.